Hi everyone, I'm Josh, the MCAT tutor, and in this video, I want to talk about what it was like going through the medical school interview process. Given that right now, I am done with all of my medical school interviews. I just want to reflect on what I think about it and some tips and tricks that I have to take away. So, in my medical school interview experience, I've had around 10 medical school interviews. From these interviews, I could tell you that I've undergone the MMI interview as well as the standard interview. And I'm going to explain what those are real quick and the differences between the two and ways to prepare for both. So, what is the medical school interview? Well, the medical school interview is considered the last step of your application. You've already done your schooling, you've got your GPA, you've taken your MCAT, you've submitted your primaries, you've submitted your secondaries, and then when you get an interview, the school sends you an email saying, hey, we like your application so much that we want to invite you to interview with us. So the interview is the last step of the medical school application process. And it's a step where a lot of people will get very antsy and they get very nervous. And I felt the same way too, and rightfully so, because you invested so much time, so much energy, so much effort into applying to medical school and preparing everything that you needed to do before the interview that you just don't want anything to go wrong. So based on the fact that I got into 3 medical schools, I want to give you my tips and tricks on how to do well in medical school interviews because it's a process that I've had to figure out for myself. And it can be very tricky if you don't know what you're doing. You don't want your interview to ruin the rest of your application. Schools, they invite you for an interview because they like who you are on paper. They like your GPA, they like your MCAT, they like your extracurriculars, they like your personal statements. They're curious to get to know who you are in person. They want to know what it's like to interact with you. They want to put a face to the application that they read on paper. And they want to make sure that the person that they meet in person is the same person who they see on the application. Keep in mind that also too, interviews, they're used for medical schools to see if you're a good fit for the school. They often try to look for people with certain traits. They look for certain stories and certain characteristics that are within their students to build a diverse class. You have to keep in mind that diversity is a huge mission for many of these medical schools. And they want students who have had different experiences in life and students who not only have accomplished a lot by the books, but they also want students who are going to add different perspectives and life experiences to the class. Because if everyone were the same, that would be a pretty boring medical school class. And that would also arguably be a disservice to the population that these physicians would be serving after they've done medical school. Because medical schools want med students to serve in many different areas and to address many different patients' needs. So you need to see it from their lens of what medical schools are trying to look for. Not that you're trying to conform to what they want, but just like the advice I gave in my secondaries, it's not so much that you need to change yourself to fit in with the medical school, but rather you need to highlight certain aspects about your authenticity that would fit with the mission of the medical school that you're interviewing at. So I want to talk about the standard interview because I know several of you might be curious about that. And I've gotten quite a few schools that have required me to do a standard interview. Many times for these schools, they will have you interview with one student. Sometimes it may not be a student. It could be a student or it could be a faculty member. Sometimes it could be one faculty member and another faculty member. Sometimes it's one student and one faculty member. For the vast majority of these interviews, I've always for sure gotten one faculty member who has interviewed me. And the faculty member could be someone who actually teaches classes in the medical school, or it could be a clinician who doesn't necessarily teach classes, but they're involved in teaching students when it comes to rotations at that specific medical school. Whatever the case is, that is how those interviews are structured, in which you're going to have 2 interviewers in the standard interview. And with each of those interviewers, usually for the vast majority of the cases I've seen and experienced personally when I personally interview for medical schools, the first person is going to spend 45 minutes interviewing you. So the interview would typically last anywhere from 45 minutes to sometimes an hour. The average is about 45 minutes. And then the second person, their interview would also last 45 minutes to an hour. So I really like the standard interview because it gives you a chance to speak with one student or one faculty or maybe 2 faculty to get to know you very well and to have an in-depth conversation for 45 minutes. I will say, in order to do well in these interviews, you must absolutely reread your application, your primary statements, and your secondary statements that you've submitted to that medical school. Because sometimes you will get students and faculty who actually do read your application and they may ask you certain things. And you don't want to be like, wait, I did that? That's not good. So you want to be really well read on your primary and secondary applications. Also, another thing too, you need to read the school's website and find everything about the medical school that you can. Find their Instagram, find their Twitter, find their YouTube, read their website, search every nook and cranny that you can online, and find out very specific programs about this medical school. And take notes. Jot down which programs would be of interest to you and which ones intrigue you. Think about questions that you could ask the interviewer on interview day. Is there a certain club at the school that they have that can pique your interest? Are you curious about the school's curriculum and the way in which they teach their classes? Or what about the way in which they conduct their rotations? Those could be all very good questions to ask on interview day. I would highly suggest reading the school's website because a very common interview question that you will get is, why do you want to go to this medical school? And you do not want to be one of those people who's like, I don't know, I applied here because the name was nice. Not a smart move. You need to apply to medical schools and have a very concrete and solid reason that shows you've done your homework and done sufficient research on the school in order to tell them that you had a very, very good reason for applying to that medical school. Specifically, interviewers, they will ask that question to see what your reasons are to going to that medical school. Do they want people going there just because of the name and that's it? I don't think that's too strong of a motivation to go to medical school. I would say interviewers, they would pick another candidate to go to that medical school because that candidate knows of a specific program that would specifically help them in their career. They would also pick another candidate who might be like, hey, I really like how this curriculum is taught. And I've noted that you had a lot of great mentorship in this specialty. That could be another reason. You have to do your research on what the specific school offers because every medical school is unique in what they offer, and you have to do your digging. That's my biggest advice when it comes to interviews. Both the standard and the MMI, which I will talk about right now. So I addressed that the standard has 2 interviewers for the most part. That's what I've experienced. Of course, every medical school can do interviews the way that they want to, so don't think of this as a hard and solid rule. Like I established with the standard, you can have 1 student, 1 faculty, or 2 faculty members interview you. It really depends on the school. They do interviews the way that they want to. So with MMIs, oftentimes there will be variance within how MMIs are conducted. MMIs, for those of you who don't know, it stands for multiple mini interview. So what does that mean? It means exactly what the name says it means. It means that you have a bunch of multiple mini interviews, in that you will get interviews that last a lot shorter, but the number of interviews will increase a lot. For example, I've had a couple MMIs in which the interviews lasted about 5 minutes compared to the 45 minutes of the standard interview. But I will tell you that even though the interviews are 5 minutes long, you get a chance to meet with more interviewers. You can have as much as 10 to 12 interviewers who will get to ask you maybe a question or two, and you will answer it. And then by the time that 5 to 7 minutes is up, you will move on to the next interviewer. And you will have a small break, usually around like maybe a minute, 2 minutes. So MMIs, the advantage of MMIs is that while it is shorter, you do have more people who will get a look as to who you are as an applicant. Because while yes, the advantage of the standard interview is that you get to talk with one person very in depth about your application and your motivations to go into medicine and why you want to apply to that school specifically, MMI is actually used to reduce bias, because it could be perhaps that the one student or faculty member might have had a bad day, that specific day, when you're interviewing with them. And it could be that their bad day experience might carry over to your interview, and they might be a little more biased in judging you unfairly in that regard. That's why the MMI was developed. Even though the one disadvantage of the MMI is that you don't get to talk with any one person too much in depth. However, with the number of people that are interviewing you, you get a much broader and more fair opinion. Because if one MMI interviewer has a bad day that carries over to the interview, well, you have like 8 to 9 others who might have a good day and that might not carry on over to their interview. So you'll have 8 to 9 other people judging you quite fairly compared to that potentially one person who might not. Again, I'm not saying that's the case for every medical school interview. I'm just saying that is a strength of the MMI, in that the more people you have, the more fairly you could potentially be judged compared to the standard interview. I'm not saying that the standard interview is unfair or the MMI is unfair. I'm just saying that they have differences in why medical schools have created those two types of interviews for the most part, and the advantages and disadvantages to them. I'm not trying to support one over the other. I'm actually telling you guys that you have to be ready for both and that you need to prepare for both interviews. It's okay to not feel like you have too much to talk about. It's okay to also take a pause and to really think about your answer before you tell the interviewer your response to the question. I remember I've had that happen to me quite a bit. Even on MMIs, it's okay to take a couple of seconds to think about what you have to answer before you say it. And that's totally fine. The interviewers understand that you're under a lot of stress and a lot of pressure, given that they have to interview quite a few applicants and they only have a certain number of seats in the medical school for certain applicants. I know for a fact, for example, that one of the schools I got into, they only admitted 20% of the applicants who interviewed with them. And I know for other schools, the number could be lower. So I get it. The pressure is there, but you need to set your nerves aside and to really focus on what is it that makes you a very strong applicant. You need to highlight certain things that are unique about you that you can contribute to the school. For example, in my case, my language ability in speaking both Spanish and Mandarin was something I really wanted to bring forward to medical schools I was applying to, that particularly had an emphasis on serving the underserved, because speaking multiple languages, Spanish and Mandarin, those are the two most common foreign languages in the United States. That would be a huge strength to bring to a medical school, especially given that there are quite a few underserved populations who speak Spanish. And that is a strength I really wanted to highlight, saying, hey, this is something I would really love to bring into medical school. And I need medical school as a tool so that I can execute my ability to speak Spanish and serve Spanish-speaking underserved patients. That's something that you can bring to the table. So you need to find things like that, strengths about yourself as an applicant that you can bring to medical schools to further strengthen their mission. Highlight that as an interviewee, and you will be a very strong candidate when it comes to the medical school process. So those are my tips about acing medical school interviews. In short, you need to know the differences between the standard interview and the MMI. You need to also be prepared to answer questions like, why do I want to go to this school? So you need to do your research and your homework on yourself in terms of rereading your own application, as well as on the school in terms of what programs they have to offer, the clubs that they have, the student activities, as well as the curriculum. Do your research on that. And lastly, just don't be nervous for the medical school interview process. I would highly suggest that you should practice with a friend who preferably has gotten into medical school, but if not, you could practice with someone who is also in the same boat as you, because you just need to have somebody test you on those questions. Not so much that you have a script based off of why I want to become a doctor, but more so that when you have a friend or somebody who's gone through the process test you on interview questions, they would be able to see what you're answering, and you would be able to answer your motivations that got you into medicine on the spot without there being as much imperfections in your answer. I get it, it's hard, and practice for interviews can make perfect. Although I wouldn't do anything too structured. I wouldn't try to memorize an entire answer off of a Word document or a Google Doc and try to regurgitate that on interview day. That's not really going to come across as too genuine, so to say. It's going to come across as more scripted, and that's the last thing you want on your interview day. Your interview day should just be like a conversation. It should be a very relaxed conversation that you should have with your interviewer. And in that conversation, you need to have several points that you want to bring up that you absolutely must convey to your interviewer. For example, one of my interviewers, she actually knew how to speak Mandarin Chinese, and it just integrated perfectly when I brought up to her that I was able to speak Mandarin, and then I actually spoke to her in Mandarin to prove that what I was saying was true. It was quite awesome, that interview. I want you guys to have interactions like that, to where you can feel free to do things like that. It doesn't always have to be so ordered and strict. You need to realize too that interviewers, They're people too, and you just need to find a way in which you can connect with them. That's the whole point of the interview, is to see how well you could connect with your interviewer. They want to see if you are a right fit for the school. That is the advice I want to give you in order to do your best in the interview process. Once you've done your interview, congratulations. Go on and celebrate because you have just gotten through the medical school application process. And do not stress about an acceptance or a rejection because that is out of your control. The way I see it is that you've done everything that is within your control to the best of your ability, and it's up to the school to make their decision. I'm not a medical school admissions officer, and I don't know the process that really happens behind closed doors when it comes to choosing students. There are a variety of factors behind why which medical schools choose students. On interview day, they're not just solely evaluating how well you did on your interview. I think that's a mistake that a lot of students tend to think. And it was a shocker to me when I heard it on my interview day that many of the medical schools I interviewed at said that the interview is only a small portion of the application that medical schools take into consideration, even after you've interviewed with them. Many times what medical schools will do is that they're going to have a committee that comes together and they talk about the applicants who have done interviews with them. They evaluate, again, their GPA, their MCAT, their primary personal statement, their secondary personal statement, extracurriculars, and then the interview with that new piece of info added. They evaluate all those factors, and somehow they make a decision. Just like how in Star Wars, somehow Palpatine returned. The whole point of this video is that I wanted to tell you about my experience in interviews and what you can do best to prepare for it. And once you're done with the interview, to not worry about the acceptance or the rejection. If it's meant to be, it's meant to be an acceptance or a rejection. And if you get accepted, congratulations, you've gotten into medical school. You should celebrate because your dreams of becoming a doctor are no longer dreams. They have now turned into goals, realistic goals that you're going to work towards in the next 4 years. That is wild. I really hope you guys will be able to experience the euphoria that comes with getting your first acceptance. My advice when it comes to interviews is not as structured as when it comes to MCAT studying because it is something that is arguably more subjective than even the personal statement, given that it is such a personal interaction between the interviewer and yourself. But in order to experience that euphoria that comes from getting an acceptance, you just need to do the best you can to prepare for interviews. Research at school, research yourself, and don't stress out over it. Just treat it like a normal conversation, and you will be fine. Trust me. I hope that this video helped you guys understand the medical school interview process way better, and that it gives you a picture of what to expect when it comes to medical school interviews. I'm going to cut another deal with you guys because, as I said before, whenever I make a deal with you all, that video does very well. So I'm going to make another deal yet again. If this video gets 75 likes, I'm pushing the like limit up again. If this interview video gets 75 likes, I will make another video in which I talk about common interview questions that you tend to get when it comes to medical school interviews and how I would answer them. I'm not going to say that the answers I give are the right answers, but I would give you a methodology behind as to how you can answer those interview questions. As somebody who got into not one, not two, but 3 medical schools, I'd be happy to make that video for you guys. But I need to see the likes get up to 75 likes in this video. You guys can do it. You guys can do it. So if that can happen, I'll keep my word and I'll make that video. But in the meantime, the MCAT is hard. The MCAT's important, but interviews do not have to be that hard. But they still are important. Anyway, I will see you later. And I'm Josh, the MCAT tutor. Bye.